Hi, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to convene. We have one more hour left. We promised the hotel and all of our wonderful AV folks that we'd be over at 4 o'clock. That gives about 5 minutes for each of the teams, plus maybe 1 minute of follow-on questions. If we start now. If you're going to put things on a thumb drive and they're not on this computer yet, don't worry. Just when you come up, you can insert your thumb drive right into this computer and give the presentation right off the thumb drive. We're going to go in the order of the teams, 1 through 9. 5 minutes, 1 minute for Q&A. And then we go on to the next. We have an easel here for those of you who are presenting by easel. I'm glad I have all of your attention, 100% dedicated attention. Is Team 1 ready? Is Team 1 in the room? Does Team 1 exist? Pardon? Nicolene is going to go and find out why our Team 1 people don't know it's 3 o'clock. Okay. Let's skip them now. Is Team 2 here? Let's go to Team 2.
All right, Team 2, we've overruled Team 1. All right, so we're Team 2. This is who we started with, but we actually had someone who didn't show up. We had 2 people who left us yesterday, and then even Dan Ruse left us today. So we wound up with a very compact but very exciting team. And the topic that we chose was vaguely smart urban transportation systems. And how we got there was a question actually posed by Dan Ruse. He said, how will self-driving cars change the urban transportation landscape? We thanked him for that. That's his research area. None of us knew anything about it. And then we kind of began to think about the problem of self-driving cars. How do self-driving cars change the landscape? Will you need to buy cars in the future if you can get anywhere in a self-driving car? And then it really occurred to us that, in fact, we have this kind of situation already with services such as Uber. You could imagine they're sort of like readily available self-driving cars. And so the question is, how are they changing the urban transportation landscape, and what could we learn from those? So our ultimate question really was, what does the future of smart urban transportation look like? How do we get there from here, and what do we need to know in order to get there? So that's really our framing question. The key issue for us was, how do we transform the world from a car ownership world into a car shared world? Okay. Is all that you need reliable transportation? I can get a car when I walk out the door and go. Is that all I need? Right? How does the short distance in the urban landscape relate to long distance travel? How do those two things have to be coordinated? That's another key issue. But ultimately, from a human side, it's what are people investing in when they're buying cars, right? Are you investing in reliable transportation? Are you investing in some sort of status symbol? Are you investing in some kind of, green vehicle? What are you actually investing in when you're buying a car? So it's really more complicated than getting from here to there. We could take the point of view of the urban area, right? Given fewer cars, given different ways people are going to get from here to there, how do we actually, what needs to change inside of that environment? There are policy decisions that go along with that. There are even business decisions that go along with that, not only from the provider of transportation and transit, but also from businesses. If folks are not traveling in the same way anymore, how is your business going to work? There are lots of different stakeholders in this problem, right? From the urban planner to the highway engineer to the car manufacturers and dealers to the city or whatever transit services to the transportation providers like the cabs and Uber and people in Zipcar, things like that, to the businesses, to the individuals, right? There are other issues related to information. If you are constantly sharing cars, then you're constantly being tracked, and what does that do for your privacy and for the security of your data? These are all open issues. When we thought about these things, we really thought that, in fact, from any particular perspective, we could take the perspective of an urban planner, we could take the perspective of a highway engineer, we could take the perspective of car manufacturers or of service providers or of transportation providers or of individuals. We could kind of think it through from any one of those perspectives. But we couldn't really imagine thinking it through from all of those perspectives at once. So if we're looking for what's the research challenge, what's the future, what's the issue here, the issue is in how do we combine multiple layers or multiple kinds of models into a single model. And we can see two obvious ways of thinking about doing that. One is to create multidisciplinary team-based processes for coming together and trying to solve problems. We can pick a cognitive scientist and a highway engineer and a social psychologist and anyone else you want to put into a team and try and figure out what are all of the influences by which this gets together. Or we could think about creating sort of an actual engineering approach to it. What's the formalism? Do we need new formalism for putting behavioral decisions into optimization models in a different way? That's the end of my story. Does my team want to add anything? Chickens. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Team number one, are you ready technologically?
No.
No. Team number three.
Well, I'm glad that we have 100% representation of PC Merced in the first two talks. The only two guys from Merced. I don't know. What's not displaying? Ah. Okay, so the team was actually very few people because in our team, not many people actually even show up. So I don't think they were at the workshop. So actually this might have played as an advantage because it was a more uniform criteria. Spend 80% of the time just defining what would be the topic. And once we define the topic, we said, okay, let's align. So we choose make solar energy more economical. So we talk about the advantage of solar energy. The peak supply also coincides with whenever we need energy, we get it. And the energy can also be generated and co-located where we actually use it. So diminution of cost in transmission lines, etc. So this is wonderful. Main problem is what you see here. So this is actual real data for a 1 megawatt solar power plant at the UC Merced campus on a cloudy day. This is the source of energy. 70% of our electricity comes from it. Imagine you trying to match that load on an actual operational campus. That's really bad. You see dramatic drops, let's say around 1:30 or so. It's 700 megawatts of drop. And then suddenly in the afternoon at 4, another 700 megawatt increase. It's just crazy. So the variability of the source, it may lead to actual stress in the grid if we deploy solar energy everywhere. So you want to use also energy storage through the low intensity periods or at night. And there are a lot of research done on energy storage, how to improve it, economically viable, et cetera. We're not touching that yet. We believe the two main market penetration issues are cost and the stability of the power grid. Cost, Jessica Transick mentioned about the rate of improvement of PV, and things are improving in that sense. And hopefully, we'll get to the point that we don't need to subsidize that technology anymore. It's going to be economically viable. But the stability of the power grid, it's an important one. So when we talk to independent system operators in the US, they say, well, we don't want to touch that with an 8-foot pole because otherwise we cannot really have a stable grid. We cannot really provide the service. So these are problems, but also opportunities. The source of variability, storage, and load could be managed simultaneously and aligned such that you can diminish the impact on the grid. But what is critical to do this is that you need information about the immediate future in 24 hours. It's absolutely key. And right now, weather models do not give you that. In other words, a weather model does not give me what's going to happen in the next 2, 5, 10 minutes. It's not there. Most of the short-term solar forecasting prediction models, they fail miserably. So motivated by these problems, in Merced, because it's kind of decent land for energy, we have 1 megawatt solar array, 1 megawatt hydro plant, we have a 2 million gallon thermal storage tank, we have 1.4 megawatts going to be deployed on the solar roof, so it's a fantastic place to play with these things. We deployed a sensor network to basically do this. We deploy sensors everywhere, and we can basically do short-term solar forecasting. But that works only at UC Merced. We don't have these sensors deployed in the entire planet, and this is what we would like, right? Because this would allow us to do short-term solar forecasting, and then we can do power plant management, the real-time and dispatching and trading, which are important for the independent system operators, management of storage resources, and load scaling. So can service science help somehow to define a system like this? So taking advantage of what Mr. Juma mentioned, let's use the post-disciplinary device. People are basically everywhere, and everywhere that matter. And most people have mobile phones. And most people also have GPS, Wi-Fi, so you have localization. And most mobile phones have also light sensor integrated. So can we leverage that information provided by the human phones for extreme spatial temporal short-term solar forecasting? So that's one aspect, that humans can help if they provide that data. The other aspect is you need to align the sources, storage, and load, which also, with the load part in particular, it involves humans. So even with perfect prediction, we can anticipate but not change the type of source behavior. However, we have 50 years of experience in load scaling in electrical engineering and computer science. Scaling from punch card jobs, CPU scaling, load balancing of server farms, cloud computing, etc. So we know how to do this. The challenge now becomes we need a scheduler for humans. Because everything that we control, we were creative, and now we're trying to control humans and human behavior, which is a completely different ballgame. So is this possible? That was the main question. And I posed, well, this may work in the UK or Japan, but not really in the US, the land of the free. But then another colleague in the same, Dan, he said, no, I have this in Miami and I love it. I get a discount on my electrical bill. So perhaps there is some hope. So, well, assuming this may work, we need what Mario mentioned is behavioral change. What are the best ways to influence humans to change behavior? Feedback system to help input scaling needs by humans, mechanistic design to provide the adequate set of incentives such that the people can buy in, new human-computer interaction design paradigms to interface and influence human behavior. It's unclear what is the right way to do this, but we need to experiment. So I apologize for the misspelling of Carol's last name, sorry. An L is missing. So the value of co-production is what are we getting out of it and what are we producing? Humans, they get the cloud data, load adjustment, human activity behavior they provide into the system, and the system provides cheaper energy, better environment, better localized weather models, etc. So kind of a symbiotic relationship. So we believe this could basically be framed in a smart service system model when you have ECS expertise with behavioral science and operational research all working together. Thank you.
Is team one ready?
No, but I'm going to just do it without the slide.
Okay,
We're
that's
going to
fine.
answer to other problems. So I'm Erin Bell from the University of New Hampshire, and I was Group 1. Our discussion topic, or our goal topic, was smart, integrative, natural disaster resilience, resilient adaptive infrastructure. So our research questions that we came up with were, can you collect real-time data, potentially from crowdsourcing, to develop a standard methodology to conduct post-mortem data collection and analysis to result in agents of change in service system design? And this came from post-disaster, a lot of individual elements. You collect post-mortem data and enhance the design, for example, in a bridge or a roadway, but rarely is that used for system design. The second question is how to halt the propagation of the hazard impact or cascading failure. How do you design routine infrastructure design, maintenance, and operations to be more resilient when a hazard occurs? How do you promote or design a network of distributed microservice systems to increase the robustness and resiliency of a macroservice system, or the levels of macroservice systems? How do you categorize and systematize the complex interaction between multiple disciplines that impact resilient infrastructure? And how do we understand and plan to deal with emerging hazard response with sparse and potentially conflicting data? So these were kind of our research questions that we came up with in dealing with integrated, smart, adaptive infrastructure systems and all of the disciplines that interact in those systems. And then some of our goals, and I'll just list a few, were, one of our goals was really to minimize recovery time and cost, increased resiliency and readiness with respect to hazards, assess system-wide risk, quantify the productive role of crowdsourcing, citizen science in hazard readiness and recovery, assess the value of incorporating product design methodologies to system infrastructure design, and discuss, and some of our knowledge gaps, to move on to that, were the understanding of the interdependencies and prioritization of human service infrastructure systems, such as transportation, clean water, energy, communication, access to emergency services such as health. System-wide uncertainty in terms of performance, level of use and human interaction, the capability to predict infrastructure system response, knowledge and probabilistic assessment of system performance metrics, minimum requirement of a system resilience and level of acceptable risk, and then evidence-based persona predicted response versus aggregate response. And one of those was the lack of a longitudinal study on the impact of hazard recovery and response efforts and protocols. So if anyone from Group 1 wanted to add something from their expertise, and I apologize for not having the slides up.
Thanks. So besides disaster recovery and urban resilience, one of the topics that came up is what a great experience it was to have a multidisciplinary team. We actually made a list of all the different disciplines and systems we'd worked on, and we were very T-shaped. We had a lot of different diversity, but we also realized we may have even gotten more out of the experience rather than all us piling our knowledge in the middle of the table. If we had better methods for multidisciplinary teams working together, or transdisciplinary teams. And so here's this book by Stephen Klein. He was at Stanford in the 90s, The Conceptual Foundations for Multidisciplinary Thinking. So one of the things we discussed, it might be good if we do another one of these where we're having multidisciplinary teams working together, if we could all collect up a literature survey of methods for multidisciplinary teams to work together. We think that might be useful.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, my heart is with Team 4, because I was a member of that, so I'll plead guilty. Team 4. Urban environment, including transportation, correct? Yep. All right.
This is the right way. Which one is it?
from there. Well, it doesn't want to open from this port. So I don't know if it was saved properly. So it's not open.
Yeah, apparently there are some technical difficulties. So,
Yeah, either way. Must be this.
okay. So I'll try to do it from my cell phone then. Talking about intelligent technology. Yes, our topic, we were looking into look at improving the urban environment, but we decided to focus on smart transportation systems, and we call it Smart Transportation Systems Today, Tomorrow, and 2100. We had a long discussion. Probably most of the time was trying to narrow down the problem to look into, and once we sort of initially started talking about transportation, and we saw that depending on the time scale we're thinking of, different ideas come to play. So what is a smart service? Are we talking something that can react instantly on a short time scale, or are we thinking of a more broad, longer time scale like what we'll be planning? And eventually we ended up that all of the above was a kind of the right answer to it. Sorry, my screen is too small. I need to. Someone told me I should get bifocals, but I resist. Yes. So in terms of the objectives, we are thinking of looking at systems across different timescales and looking at comfortable travel. Think of minimizing travel time. We talk about congestion spreading. And also, an interesting objective was to develop the system, I'm thinking of a longer time scale, in a way that we reduce car ownership. From each of we have people from different disciplines, and each one of the disciplines has a focus on a particular aspect. Just to give you an idea, we have civil engineers looking to building more roads or larger roads or adding additional space in the road. Signal timing. We have social behavior. What are the preferences, motivations, policy making, cost, incentives, and so forth. Computer science, dealing with how do we use the data that we can get from different elements. Cellular automation, network studies, and so forth. So each discipline look at this problem and focus on a particular aspect that obviously is tailored to our particular preference. However, when we look at trying to go across disciplines, we see a lot of interesting ideas that we take advantage of. So we have pervasive sensing. We talk about mobile telephones, but also we have imaging. We have video cameras in a lot of places monitoring traffic. We have things that count cars on the road. So there is a lot of sensing technology available that we can take advantage of. And in that regard, big data analytics becomes an interesting theme across many of these to understand traffic patterns, travelers' behavior, be able to use that information for short-timed decision, but also for a longer time scale for planning, influence behavior using different policies, looking at incentives such as taxes, rewards, options, and in particular, offer people options that are catered to our lives. So maybe you want to go now from place A to place B if you need to, but something that you could think of if you like to do workouts or exercise. If there is a congestion problem, you can take advantage of that, and you can get information that will help you make those types of decisions that are catered to our lives. Richard was mentioning the idea of they have here at the entrance of Callahan Tunnel? Summer. Okay, so at the entrance of Summer, there's a guy that sells coffee during rush hour, going from car to car. So, there are interesting ideas that came across as a way that, we would like to make travel more efficient, meaning reduce time, you spend less time on your car. But if you are in a situation that you need to be in your car, how can we make it more comfortable and enjoyable for those that are traveling? Last, in terms of big research themes, we think of the idea of modeling to be a very important one. Looking at social technical models, we have a lot of physical models, but we also have a lot of social behaviors. And how can we integrate these models in a way that we can understand the interdependencies of these systems, look at emergent behaviors, but also take advantage of all this deluge of data that is available and assimilate that into the models that allow us to adapt the models to make them more closer to reality in some sense, and also in a way that we can use them to adopt how the adoption of new technologies will impact our behaviors. So things such as unmanned vehicles. If now we have a bunch of unmanned cars offering transportation services around the city, how will that change our behavior? So these are some of the ideas we talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. Team number 5.
I changed my mind. I'm not talking. Actually, no, it's just the download. I don't know how I got roped into this. I just
There you go.
So as I said, I wasn't here yesterday, as you know, I wasn't here yesterday. And I'm only going to be able, therefore, to describe the second half of the conversation. So I hope, and additionally, 5 out of the 8 members suspiciously left right before this presentation. So I ask you to jump in, the rest of the team members, and for the rest of you, just imagine that this answers all of your questions. So these are the original members of Team 5, and we spent this afternoon talking about smart mobility in the aging in particular. So decline of mobility, loss of ability to move is one of the major complaints of the elderly. It constrains their ability to socialize with friends and family, meet their own physical needs, take part in the activities of the community. That's what we hear a lot, but what we discussed was that we don't actually know what mobility means. We often make some assumptions that it means something like being able to move your body or being able to drive somewhere. But in our discussion, we talked a lot about how we could do a study of what mobility means to this particular community so that we're not solving a problem that the community doesn't have and that we're not applying a one-size-fits-all technology to an extremely diverse community with extremely diverse needs. So what is the psychological meaning of mobility? It might be loss of independence, the need to be dependent on one's children, for example. What's the physical meaning of loss of mobility? It may simply, not so simply, be the fear of not being able to walk somewhere without doing permanent and severe damage to yourself. And the social meaning that it may disrupt patterns that in fact are keeping you well, such as regular connection with friends, family, and the larger community. So a study like this can tell us about freedom of movement, movement without fear, maintenance of social connections, maintenance of connection to the city, perhaps exploration of the world during retirement. Mobility may mean that once you are free from a daily job, you are more mobile. In fact, for many elderly, that is what aging means, freedom of mobility. And it may be about dependence. So this calls for a human-centered design process rather than making assumptions that we work with the community to understand these needs. And I was reminded of a story that Dan Swarek often tells about designing a robot for disabled teens, where they designed the robot to help cook for the teens and take care of their physical needs. If I remember correctly, when the robot was delivered, the teens in question said, "But why didn't you build us the robot we needed?" And of course, the researchers thought they had. Of course, independence must be being cooked for, having your physical needs met. And what the teens said was, "I'd rather starve than be deprived of my friends. That's my need. I'm a teenager. I need social connection." So studies like this, did I get that more or less accurate? More or less. So studies like this can allow us to ensure that we know these meanings for the community before we dive in with a potential solution. There are going to be differences, of course, between urban elderly, rural elderly, and suburban elderly. There's going to be differences across subcultures of the United States. And any solution that we design needs to take into account not just the technology needs of the individual, but the technology opportunities of the space. How do we make smart spaces locally in people's homes, but also in cities? The example was given of crossing at the light. For many old people, as for many disabled people, a red light simply doesn't last long enough to be able to get across. And so the very technology that's supposed to help people constrains their mobility. And the final step of this is to think about technology deployment. How can the technology itself be mobile? Many of the robots that we see in old age homes weigh something like 500 pounds, so they're probably not going to get in a car with an old person and go to the next place that they want to be during the day. We might think about how an assistant could have an instantiation in physical form, but also in virtual form on the dashboard of a car, on a refrigerator, on a mobile phone. So I'm opening up the space rather than closing it. Thank you.
Team number 6 is next. We've had a suggestion that these are so excellent that we'd like to collect all the presentations, whether they're electronic or on flip charts. So if they're flip charts, please give them to me at 4 o'clock when we're done. And if they're electronic, we need a central email address. How about my email address, and then I can distribute it to others who want it. So I am rclarson@mit.edu. So if you could just email me, and I guess we can't do it in this room, can we? So downstairs in the lobby, or if you're in this hotel up in your room, rclarson@mit.edu. If you could just email me before you leave here today, just so you don't forget. Because I think NSF and the rest of and the MIT team would like to digest these ideas and maybe get back to you about them and these sorts of things. So thank you very much.
And the wireless for the lobby does work in the back. Speakers come out. Fill the lead. Come on. Yeah, it's radio lobby.
There's no audio, right?
Welcome, and welcome to Group 6. Let's see, we got to get the, I think we got to do mirroring to get this to work. Yeah.
I would have assumed that we did that. Do you know how to do it? No, go ahead. This is not my computer, so I'm not quite sure. Where's the panel? Oh, these people's computers. I don't know.
He's got to lay down differently than mine. There you go.
That's not it, though. You need to get him. No, that's not it. We need to get him. Call him over.
Rick? That's the other Larson. Oh, there you go. It's in settings, displays, and display mirroring.
Yeah. That should do it. It should, right?
There we go. Okay. Yay.
just hit play.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so we're group 6, and I'm Andy Hospodar. I was somehow elected scribe because I came in late yesterday. So I'll do my best to tell you what we talked about. So we chose as our topic the need to counter obesity and associated diseases. And we wanted to look at our challenge was to see if we could advance health informatics. And so we had a lot of shuns to start with: prevention, detection, mitigation, motivation, creating conditions, behavior change, intervention, and education. This was a really interesting group. It was very diverse, and we spent a lot of time going around the problem area and exploring it. And it was really nice to hear a lot of different perspectives from each of the people that contributed. And in fact, everyone in the group contributed. So we started down a path, and we actually found that we got so far down the path, we had to turn it back around and take out the sheet again and look at it and read what the questions were we were really supposed to be answering. And then it got much more interesting because we got to apply what we were thinking about towards the research we were going to propose. So we looked at some options. We looked at designing communities differently. We looked at providing incentives, and especially incentives for healthy food and exercise. And we realized that we're all kind of upper middle class and upper income people here, but this is not really the target population, is not really us. And we had a lot of discussions about hipsters and what hipsters do in urban areas, and realized it wasn't about them either. So we came up with a chart. We figure, why not? We got 8 people together. We got to have at least a chart about one thing. We realized it came down to something very simple, and it was diet and exercise. And in diet and exercise, we realized that there were influencers on the left here that involved design, public policy, information, incentives. We then brought it all the way out to say what's socially sexy and what are the body images here, and what are the societal implications that we have from doing this type of research. So we looked at this and we explored figuring out the reasons why diet and exercise just didn't work. And they turned out to be fairly simple as finding good healthy food and finding time to exercise, right at the top there. And so we went through and realized that our public policies probably needed to change as well. Jamie Oliver for school lunches and Mr. Wizard would be really nice to have around. There needed to be community involvement, role models, applications with metrics and markers, incentives such as food stamp bonuses for healthy foods, portion controls. None of these involve technology yet, which kind of fascinated us. We got this far down the project without actually having to apply any new technology to look at ways that we can solve it. And socially sexy, somebody brought up a t-shirt that said "Got Kale," looking at promoting for exercise athletes over supermodels. What a concept. And then body images. A big thing was educating people here at the bottom. It says pop is not juice, juice is not water, diet sodas are not okay, and candy is not food. And instead promoting exercise that encourages people to be strong and healthy, no matter of their body type. Norms that need a redefinition, and enhancing the concept of SMART in exercise. So how do we enable a smart system? We first said, let's take a look at who the stakeholders would be as such a smart system. And grocery stores are right up there at the top to enable a smart system to provide really healthy foods. Schools turn out to be a big one. We all of a sudden realized that every one of us went to a school that had home economics. That isn't even a part of schools anymore. We don't teach kids how to cook in junior high school. Business profits are always an incentive. Marketing and advertising partners, government, and insurance companies, oddly enough, would be a huge stakeholder in this. They're offering discounts now for people who say they're promising never to smoke or not smoking for the next year until open enrollment again. The incentives. Cost is incredibly critical for the low-income people. Adaptation for an electronic ICU model, more services, more billable hours was kind of the theme there. Redirecting the wasted foods and providing tax incentives so that the foods aren't wasted. Improving a shopping experience so that the positioning of the healthy foods and the smells and the tastes are all there so you can see them. Pre-cut proportion fresh food with menus delivered directly to the homes. It's kind of like the mac and cheese versus the eggplant argument, where mac and cheese, every box tells you how to prepare it. You pick up an eggplant, doesn't tell you how to prepare it. So cooking at school, bringing it home, and making food production visible. These are all good things. So a smarter service system could start off by collecting baseline data, looking at behavioral habits, how we buy food, what the patterns are for commutes. We could use GPS and understand what are the demographics around this. taking a look at the typology and personality of the behavior types, and then matching interventions to behaviors and personalizing it. So analyzing and distilling data daily and using a baseline to assess the outcomes of how the system is succeeding. Well, what are the research problems? The first one was obviously creating a model of these service systems, and then identifying interventions that can actually change behaviors. And those two together are actually pretty challenging when you take a look at what it takes to, first of all, create a model, and then secondly, figure out how to use that model to change a behavior. And then identifying the stakeholders and motivations to offer service. We did a little bit of that kind of as a preliminary brain trust. And then identifying the use cases and technology that can actually change the behaviors. So we didn't actually perform the research here. We just kind of identified the things that we wanted to do in this research. And then finally, looking at metrics that would measure impact, things like polling and sampling. And we came up with a short three-line item proposal, and that was create a living lab experiment. And here we would be looking at maybe a group of veterans or perhaps a demographically diverse area such as Bakersfield, California, or a particular ethnic group, and studying them on a small scale and understanding how they go about and how they could rebalance this conflict that goes on today between diet and exercise, and using that to roll back into the original problem about how do we deal with obesity and how do we deal with that in an ongoing larger, in a situation where we're watching obesity now grow at logarithmic growth rates. Okay, well, that's our presentation. Thank you.
Lucky number 7. A couple of you have already emailed me the thing, so I guess we can get on email here if you want to. I've done it myself. So don't forget before you leave.
Something happened. Oops. Blue screen. No, not blue screen. Wait. No, it disappeared again. Yeah, okay. Let's see. Yeah, so I was not here yesterday, so I guess most of what I'll be talking about is a little bit of what the group talked about yesterday, and please feel free to chime in, anyone else. And these were the participants in the group, many of whom are not here right now, so pardon me if I misrepresent them. So we picked the topic of aging populations, and I think part of the initial discussion was to try to come up with a mission statement or a goal for what is it that we were going to try to improve or achieve. And here are some possible goals, metrics that we could work towards. The first thing is to help these diverse. I think one thing that there was a recognition early on is that that elderly populations is a very broad class of folks, depending on what you call elderly, and there are very different ability levels, and so it's very diverse. And so really there's no one-size-fits-all solution or even one-size-fits-all problem for this kind of area. And the key idea is that especially as people get older and more incapacitated, the ability for them to be able to be safe, to be protected, to live independently if they so desire was an important goal. Many people who are considered senior are quite capable and still very able to work, and therefore one of the goals of providing services in this case would be to extend the ability of such individuals to work and contribute to the overall economy for as long as they are able to do so meaningfully. And finally, if and when they either during the time they're able to continue working, but they are partially incapacitated, or perhaps later, the idea would be to improve quality of life through different types of interventions, some low-tech, some pretty high-tech, that will allow them to function to the best of their abilities. And that's sort of the big goal here. I think yesterday there was a large discussion of what people around the table could do and bring to the table. There's obviously design of new wearables that are actually wearable. Design of end-to-end infrastructure systems that will allow us to gather information about either individuals or the environments in which they exist or the events that they are subjected to, and ways of presenting that either through virtual reality to be able to, both for perhaps someone who's trying to respond to them, or someone who's for them to be able to, for rehab, in the case of virtual reality for rehab is certainly very much a research topic today. There was, I guess, agent modeling and sensing was thought of as an area that could help in designing better services. There's a huge human factors issue in terms of what is really useful. Again, I think you have to be careful here to not tread on the technology for technology's sake argument here. Dimitris was very involved. He's not here right now, but he was talking about technologies that, or mechanisms, I wouldn't even say they're necessarily technologies, mechanisms that will prevent the onset of diseases through early detection mechanisms, not necessarily diagnose illnesses, but come up with prognostic, I guess that's the word, mechanisms to detect any potential and predict any potential problems that could occur and deter them from, stop them or delay their onset. There was a lot talked about in one of the earlier breakouts on mobility needs for aging, and I guess that was also one of the topics. There were several challenges that came about. One of them is, these are some of those, and I won't go over all of them because I was not there. I don't know exactly what was discussed. But obviously there's user design studies, user experience studies that are needed in order to figure out what are technologies and services that would actually be meaningful and helpful and usable by seniors and by the aging population. A lot of times the ability to handle emergencies is dictated by resource constraints, and therefore how to mitigate this is an issue. Isolation is a big concern. A lot of seniors today live in facilities where, and their loved ones or family members are located very far away who are potential caregivers. This distance plays a big role in effective care and even in some sense early diagnosis and treatment of certain types of preventable illnesses. There was, I believe, a doctor on the team yesterday who essentially indicated that there's a lot of preventable accidents and unnecessary hospitalizations that are happening today that could be prevented through, if intercepted earlier, and am I correct? If taken care of early. And there's the obvious issue of declining cognition and what can be done to prevent that declining cognition. So there were three interesting examples that we talked about today, and this urgent, ongoing, and proactive will become interesting as we sort of work towards a potential framework in which we could think about these problems. So one example that was discussed was this idea of stroke or fall detection in place. You know, the idea that seniors living alone, they fall. Falls can be quite detrimental to you know, someone who's very old and living alone, and sometimes they're not able to get to a phone or get to help quick enough to be able to take care. And the use of wearable sensing, communication technologies, being able to interpret these signals and extract meaningful events is a service that would be useful. The important thing here is to be able to eliminate false warnings. If you get a call saying, Mr. Joe fell down, and it happens 3 times, and he's actually not fallen down because your sensor's already, then you have a problem, the system is going to be turned off. So the detection and elimination of false warnings is important to design in this particular case, and obviously medical professionals are needed in order to alleviate the problem. The other two ones are a little more, I would say, well, at least the second one is a little bit more low-tech, and this was the idea of being able to come up with mechanisms to create peer social networks, a human solution, if you will, through the use of local groups, through encouraging people who are living in isolation to go and meet with other folks through everybody has a mobile phone, so is there some way we can, through personalized messaging, encourage people to not live in an isolated manner, and this will possibly help with certain types of cognitive issues, depression, and these other kinds of concerns. So using technology and knowledge of people around to be able to create these proactive social networks and encouraging people to go on on an ongoing basis to these activities was a low-tech solution, but could be a very effective one. Dimitris came up with this again. The idea here is apparently the bank keeps track of all the checks that you write, and you sign on those checks. Your signature doesn't change tremendously over the years, but if there are mechanisms to be able to detect how your signature changes, this is a way of doing an early detection of physical deterioration of a person through signature analysis on these checks. And of course, a solution like this, it's proactive, it requires very little additional technology. Of course, it requires the analytics, but it doesn't require any technology on the person to do this kind of early detection. So there may be sort of these unusual solutions that can help detect the onset of problems and come up with ways of providing interventions early on. So then we came up with this, it's not very accurate, but there's this framework. The y-axis here is really some measure of the ability level of a person, and there are various tools and I guess models to be able to come up with numbers that detect how able a person is. Fitts law is the one that comes to my mind. There's, activities. So if you think of the problems and the solution space as, in this case, it's only a three-dimensional picture, but it could be multidimensional in practice. You have different technology interventions, social interventions, structural interventions for people with different ability levels. And the events that you're responding to may be urgent. They may be urgent as in someone's fallen down or someone's having a stroke. Something's ongoing as in ask them to get out of the house, or something could be completely proactive, as in, see if a longitudinal analysis of how their handwriting has changed or how their signature has changed. And each of these you can come up with different services and different solutions in that operating space. And the issue is, what are the challenges and what are meaningful operating points here for people with different types of ailments or different categories and different abilities, and what things are needed. So we also came up with a three-step, remember this is all done in half an hour, right? So a three-step solution where we do need significant work on needs assessment through field studies, surveys, analytics to figure out what people need. How can we leverage existing data, existing tools, technologies, use that to explore a solution space of high-tech and low-tech solutions, and then go back and adapt and augment these environments and the people themselves to be able to protect, provide safety, improve quality of life, increase, et cetera. Obviously, a lot of this requires significant interdisciplinary research to address all of these issues. But more importantly, I think the government, public, private partnerships are essential in this domain. Local government especially, we discussed, was very critical. There are legal issues of liability. What if something doesn't work? What if something goes wrong? Who's liable? What about the privacy concerns? There's these issues that need to be held with. There's socioeconomic trade-offs. If I'm building a facility, a group meeting facility, where do I place it so that I defray the cost of transporting people from place to place, but pay more to install the facility in the first place? So this brings in the urban planners. Oops, there's a typo there. There may be barriers to deployment and user acceptance that needs to be studied. So, thanks.
Thank you very much.
That was amazing for a half hour of the group discussion. What we've gotten with an hour or two. Woo! A whole proposal to NSF. Yeah. Okay, so now Team 8 is getting ready here. Again, for those of you who might not have seen it, my email address is rclarson@mit.edu. Okay. That's Larson with an O, the Swedish version. And one of us in the group has misplaced a blue purse. We think it may have robotized itself and be under one of these tables or something. So if you could just take a look around your local neighborhood and see if you see a blue purse, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Just wait for her. Why are we not getting any detection here? Where'd he go? Hold that one, that's mine.
It was up there. Just plug it back in. It was on the screen already.
It was? Oh, it came up? Okay. I thought I didn't see it.
There you go. You have it there.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'm Dave.
I'm Connor Llewellyn from Villanova. And out of the many things I've learned this past couple days is never tell a group of professors that you're a graduate student, or they would delegate all of their tasks to you, which is why I'm up here speaking to you right now. But so we had a great group of...
He gets first authorship.
We had a great group of engineers, computer scientists, social scientists, and if you can believe it, we went off in a few tangents. So instead of really focusing on one idea, we wanted to kind of develop a framework to look at implementing smart service systems on many different problems. So kind of the initial idea that we came up with was, do we want to break the rules, not follow the exact assignment? We said yes. How do we break the rules? Then analysis across all potential candidates. Solicit diverse approaches, got a lot of different input from a lot of different people, and then try out our framework on 2 of the supplied problems.
So the framework we ended up with is the idea that simply whatever you come up with will be off. And even if it's successful tomorrow, it won't be a week, a month, a year later as different systems change, adapt to each other. So we came up with these 4 approaches to work through an analysis of any of the potential candidates, such as the lists we were given. So the first is to use the business framing from some of our group value proposition. For our more high-risk, high-performance world people, it's the mission. And the question is, what's the mission? How do you crisp what's the real mission? And if you don't understand the mission, the value proposition, the ability to work through the process is not going to go very well. The second was map the roles and relationships. Figure out what are the interdependencies and levels that are going on for the case you're interested in. Third area was timing. How does pacing, tempo, synchronization go on, given you have these roles and relationships? When you have a mission context, you can start to define scenarios and things that put time pressure on things. And the fourth step was respect the trade-offs. There's many kinds of trade-offs. Understand the trade-offs so you can start to find ways that are going to produce progress and leverage despite the fact there's always trade-offs.
And from looking at it in that perspective, some of the research and development finds, we looked to solve the fundamental questions that we started out with. What were the modeling targets? This informs theory, and then again predicts economic impact. So how's this going to affect economy in the long run?
So we're trying to say, if we work through this, we're going to start defining a research agenda that is productive, agnostic to particular techniques, and going to continue to function as the world changes.
So the first case we looked at was infectious disease, specifically Ebola. So our value proposition for this would be to control the infection rate. We want to minimize it. Roles and relationships, define the roles of really the people involved in this problem, and how the interdependencies, how these people are interacting, and then the timing, the pacing of this. So how do we keep pace with different demands of Ebola or of another infectious disease? And then respecting the trade-offs. Looking at whether we're underprepared, underpracticed, undertested, and dealing with that as it comes up.
So for the Ebola case, basically we were trying to run through the recent, we didn't have access to a real analysis for this, but given some of the reports that were out there and some of the things we have dug up as interested parties of several people at the table, we understood that coordination across levels and roles was quite poor. The inability to keep pace produced some problems, and the trade-offs were the lack of investment in advance of these events because of different interactions at different levels of the stakeholders. So the second case we did was obesity. And it was nice because the value proposition becomes more difficult to state. It's not necessarily easy in the infectious disease case, but it may give you the sense of you've got a good one. For obesity, our value proposition immediately hit at least 4 levels. And the question is, what's the impact of your interventions, and what are the goals for a patient-level view, a provider-level view, a healthcare organizations, and a society or policy level? Very quickly, with some backdrop on some friends and family who investigate this, the current meta-analysis, the most recent meta-analysis, is that the current interventions neither are not effective either at scale of the problem and the growth of the problem, nor are they long-lasting enough. And so, again, the method is to map the roles and relationships across levels. And in particular here, you're looking at the way different responses at different levels for the different groups would work across purposes, as Paul said for his case. Even though each one might be organizable and alignable across things, they are colliding when you look at the different levels. The timing here is a nice one compared to the other one, because now you're looking at a long-term temporal scale. How do you deal with the increasing prevalence in the society? And then respecting the trade-offs hits us with different versions at each level in the value proposition and across levels. And obviously that's been the controversy over, we've got some New Yorkers here, are they still here? Big soda bottles got banned for a while, right? So,
It never went off.
oh, they never went off? Oh, okay, well, there was an attempt.
Yeah.
There was publicity about it. And there's been other things to regulate sugar and a variety of unhealthy things that are too easy and cheap and too available in some of the socioeconomic neighborhoods. So we ended up with a process that we thought we could work across different examples. We could clarify the mission, define ways to move forward, and build a research agenda that would be effective in each of these and other cases. So our name is SAVE.
Smart Services Adaption for Economic Viability.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is yours.
Last but not least, number 9.
We're analog, it's cool.
You're doing it back there?
Can we get back here?
Just think about this, most people won't be able to read your, so a lot of good words will be there. But we are back there, we have, oh, we lose the video.
Good. Okay, thank you for still being here. So our group, number 9, chose the national need increase in resilience to hazards, and we took this theme very seriously, so therefore we chose a on-purpose, low-tech approach in the absence of power, so we use flip charts. And so our team took a very proactive approach in basically boiling down the problem from the hazard perspective. First, we looked at the fact that there's natural hazards, terrorist hazards, or man-made hazards, if you will. We then looked at a variety of hazards just to get an idea. On the side of that, we came up with the fact that earthquakes are pretty much the mother of all evils. And very quickly, we then figured out that as far as countermeasures are concerned, that there's a function or a dependency on time as far as qualitative and quantitative countermeasures are concerned. So then we went on to actually define what we meant by resilience. And so one aspect was to build better buildings and so forth, and also to look at a more responsive or responsiveness on a shorter time scale, which means in our case the first 24 hours, which we chose on purpose. Although, as was pointed out by some of the group members, the government sometimes takes longer than 24 hours to do something. But on purpose to challenge ourselves, we chose the 24-hour time frame. Hence, we did not pay attention to how quickly you return to normal from a hazard, which could, of course, be anywhere from days, weeks, months, or years. For example, Katrina. Then we identified that, of course, with resilience, we talk about logistics in particular as the biggest challenge, how you get food, water, supplies, medical, shelter, and so forth to the people in need. And with that, we arrived at a definition of a smart service system based on the following need. And the overall need is actionable information in as many hands as possible to increase the resilience. So based on that, we then defined the name for the smart service system, which we call right content to the right people at the right time at the right space. So R to the power 4, that's what it is. As a result of that, we quickly identified some of the fundamental research which is necessary and transdisciplinary. So some of the items are aspects as to time scalability. So several models, of course, work on, let's say, a micro time scale, more macro time scale, anywhere from seconds to minutes, days, weeks. So there's a need to have models which can continuously adapt to various timescales. The same goes for spatial scalability. So it has to be on the order of individuals, groups, parts of a city, cities, regions. And so basically covering the micro, meso, and macro scale. And that's a generic problem across many disciplines. I was once invited to a DOE think tank to talk about biology systems, simulations, and the same topic came up to span different time scales and spatial scales. Another big part was, and that kind of led to the ultimate interesting outcome of our exercise, we then figured out that information extraction and data fusion from different sources, as was pointed out by the other group already, is one of the big issues, how to source social media as they are available, if they are available, and other sources, such as sensors, sensor platforms, satellite data, and so forth, as one of the research areas. But then, very quickly, we came up with deliberate censorship and content design of information. And so let me put some light on that. So the approach for our system we took, or the team took, was to basically, we have to bridge the heterogeneity across stakeholders. There needs to be a transdisciplinary understanding. Of course, there's communication networks, which is one big aspect. Social sciences in particular, such as psychology and sociology. So basically, we have to deal with the psyche of the individual person affected by the hazard and groups of people. And that's kind of the novel aspect in a way. Physical infrastructure, of course, which then engages civil engineering, material sciences, and so forth. But then came sort of, from our perspective, the novel content, which is the content design. So what do you communicate to the community, to the individuals, to the city, or to the region which is affected by a hazard? And so that part comprises aspects of psychology, sociology, political sciences, potentially marketing experts. And just to give you an idea, so it's basically along the lines of the mushroom treatment, right? You basically feed them bullshit and keep them in the dark. So the idea is basically you not necessarily want to tell the truth just now. You may want to come up with the full truth a little bit later when it's more opportune. In other words, the idea is to craft information and to control information when you disseminate it in order to achieve a certain outcome which is beneficial for the greater good. So think of the mirror in the elevators, as we learned yesterday, which resolved apparently the problem of complaining while waiting for the elevator. So, okay, let's see. Yep. So to basically ask or answer the 4 questions which were basically given to us, thanks. So the important unresolved fundamental question is basically, there's twofold. So one is the scale. Scale is a big issue, both on the time side and the spatial side. And on the information, it's the extraction of data, the data fusion problem, which is an omnipresent problem, and the information control. So how you craft information before you disseminate it. So what's in it. And so basically that requires a new understanding and perspective across different disciplines, which then arise at what we call the content design. Because this one is truly transdisciplinary, because it cannot just come from the engineering side, not just from the science side, not just from the political side. It has to also come from the psychology side, sociology side, in order to not create more panic. And basically, the third part is, are there important differences or important and different research problems at different scales? Yes, there are. Obviously, the content design evolves as a function of time and space. So the information content will be definitely will be time dependent as time progresses after the hazard has occurred, after the disaster has occurred. There will be different content necessary at different resolution and substantive content. And basically, the fourth part is human-centered design considerations, whether they influence the research approach. Obviously, that's the case because we want to have the right content to the right people at the right time, at the right space. And in particular, we want to have actionable information delivered to the people. So it could be, for example, stay at home, which might be for the first few hours the right thing to do, or do something else. And that's pretty much, oh, we have one more thing. That is, as far as the deliverable is concerned. So the common vehicle used for these types of things are mock simulations and case studies. But one aspect to that is we need to increase the efficiency or efficacy of these types of simulations, engaging potentially high-performance computing, because we need to simply shorten the turnaround time to study the various outcomes. And as the novel part, really we focused on the integration of knowledge, both from the STEM field in conjunction with the human behavior, which is the psychology and sociology side, to basically have a synergistic effort between the two fields, so that the sum of the parts is, actually, that's what the outcome is, greater than the sum of the parts. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Well, that concludes our 2-day workshop, and I'm still on sensory overload. It's going to take me several days, maybe a week or two, to sort this all out and kind of arrange it in my own head. By the way, again, if you haven't emailed me this stuff or your presentation, or I'll just take those flip charts, okay? And there are others who I want to share it with. So I want to thank you all for spending 2 days with us. The energy in the room and, of course, next door was fantastic. I want to thank NSF, IBM, and Fujitsu for financially supporting this 2-day workshop. And I want to thank Nicolene and her entire Crackerjack MIT team. Big round of applause. Big round of applause for everything that they did. Thank you so much. And we will follow up with a brief, but hopefully informative to us and to you, assessment evaluation questionnaire by email. And we'll ask for what we did right, what we did wrong, and if and when we do this again, how we can do it better. And that's it. Thank you very much. And oh, one question.
How will you make the slides available? Are you going to publish them on a website? Or?
I think what we're going to do is put all the slides we have back on our website by the person's name who made the presentation.
Okay, great.
Is Nicolene, are you okay with that?
As you know, I think we said this at the beginning, we've been webcasting this. We're also creating a taped archival version that will be up on MIT Tech TV in a few days. So we'll share that with
Yeah, but the PowerPoints will be separate, and I think our preference would be, some of them are already on our scheduled website. So we can put them there. And the video, as I understand the production process, before Thanksgiving, a rough cut of these 2 days will be up on our website. And I have to talk to AMPS then to segment it, because it takes a little bit more time to segment it by speakers. So ultimately, they'll be segmented by speakers. So if you were one of the presenters and you want to show your department head or your dean or your president or whatever, we'll have the opportunity for you to do that. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, and safe travels.